morning, and good morning again. Listen, welcome. Let me just say welcome to you this morning. To those of you that are joining us by way of Facebook Live, we're just delighted to have you stay with us, to be sticking and staying with us. Welcome to those of you who have been joining us by way of our YouTube channel. What a delight it is to have you with us, to be consistently on board with us. We're just delighted for your faithfulness. Today, I cannot say thank you enough for just being reliable and dependable. You have been absolutely supportive, and we want to say thank you this morning. Today's broadcast is nothing short of what we've been offering you in this series. I want to say to you this morning a couple of quick housekeepings as we join in today. I'm hopeful that you will stay with us. We're doing some deep diving around a series around mental health. We are finding out, you look on the TV, CNN just did a recent broadcast around it. Listen, our school systems are dealing with it as well. And so we're having this conversation in our space to help you have a better understanding around mental health. Listen, the series is entitled Mental Health: Myths, Medicine, and or Miracles. There is a big combination that can happen between any of these and all of these. And I'm asking you to just stay with us. We want to invite you today to get your questions ready. You have seen us in operation. You get access to qualified, competent counselors, clinicians. Listen, all the best in the business, and we're no short today. I want to give you some quick housekeepings as we go through this. How can you join? Maybe you have someone today that wants to be able to join and you didn't get the link to try to get them to join. All they have to do is go to Facebook and type in Dr. K.L. Williams Ministry. And there's a space between Williams and Ministry, and it'll bring them right into the broadcast. Or if they don't have Facebook, they can go to our YouTube channel, Dr. K.L. Williams Space Ministry, and type in the handle there as well. And I want to also invite you, if you're been following us and you saying that this is really meeting your needs, and maybe there's another angle, topic, subject you want us to drill down on, bring experts in to help you in this thing called life's issues. We're being life issues coaches, trying to bring some real, transparent, honest, and straightforward conversation. But we always try to give you some type of practical tools to put in your toolbox to help you when the sessions are over. I want to remind you also that even after this session is over, we had the very same thing last time. You viewers, the Real Talk, you had so many questions, and guess what? You were able to go back to our YouTube channel. Our IT team has done an amazing job trying to put these in order. Any one of the series that we've done thus far, you can be able to play it again at your leisure. Also want to ask you to do me another favor, and that is that when you're in this session today, if you'll just send us a good morning, hello, or shout or something, what it will do is it'll allow us to give you a shout out. Let me show you how this works. I want to say good morning to Miss Inez Russell Wade. Listen, all the way up in Warrenton. Good morning to you. Listen, one of my church members joining in early this morning. Sister Satra, good morning to you all the way from the Wake Forest area, Raleigh, Durham area. Want to say good morning to you. Sister Ethel Fredericks from Virginia. Thank you again for joining in this morning. Listen, my god brother Joseph Nance Jr., I owe you a phone call. I know that to be true. He's right here in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Mr. Gene Flanagan, all the way from Eastern North Carolina, down in Jacksonville. I want to say a mentor that I am so thankful for, an early school teacher in elementary, but he has certainly spoken into our lives. I want to ask you to continue to give the shout outs, and we'll call you so that everybody across the U.S. can know that you tuned in this morning. And my good clinician, brother, Reverend Dr. Linwood Carver, I want to always give a shout out to him. He brings a wonderful perspective, clearly around the clinical side, as well as a faith leader. I'm going to be asking him to join us on our last session, which is going to be mental health and the church. What a wonderful lineup we have for you joining in. But today, listen, I want to ask you to do me a favor, hit that share button to give someone else a chance to be exposed to these clinicians. Can I tell you something? They're giving us a favor, because typically we would have to get on their calendars, get in their sessions, and then many times pay what we call a consultation fee. But out of a commitment to helping others, they've joined in with us for these 6 weeks to come and bring you some top, credible, and reliable information. I'm telling you, if you will just hit that share button, we will be too glad to do that as well. I also want to say to many of you, listen, we're thankful for your ability to take this information. Someone asked me, what's the difference? I'm telling you right now that when you leave this world, I'm telling you that the only thing that will matter is what you have done for someone else. I'm not calling anyone out, but I am asking you to consider that mental health is a real issue. What we know for sure is that there are so many people who are dealing with this, but they don't even know the next step. And so for that reason, I'm so excited to be able to introduce our guest on today, Dr. Caban-Holt. She is no stranger in the space of clinicians and mental health. Dr. Caban-Holt, I want to bring her to the stage now so that she will have as much saturated time as possible to really just let the good Lord use you. I am a man of faith, and I'm unapologetic about my conviction. And so what we know for sure is that the good Lord says his people perish for a lack of knowledge. And so today, seeking mental health in an age of misinformation, I want to welcome Dr. Allison Caban-Holt to our broadcast on this morning. And we're saying to you on behalf of the 2022 Real Talk Life Issues Coaching Series family, welcome today. She is no stranger. She's prepared herself. She's a clinician in her own right, psychologist, and doing amazing work also in the space of mental health connected to Alzheimer's. And so whatever space she wants to do, she's a PhD clinician as well. I'm so excited. She works currently with the Wake Forest School of Medicine at the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity, doing an amazing job, making a major footprint in the space of mental health, even as it relates to Alzheimer's. And so her information is on the screen now. We'll get her to flash that again in a little bit. But my job today is to digress so she can increase and have as much time as possible. And so with that being said, Dr. Caban-Holt, I could not say thank you enough for thinking it not robbery to come and try to help somebody today. I promise you, listeners, that you're going to be blessed today. The only thing I ask is that you get a pen and a piece of paper out, because as she's giving her presentation, I want you to begin to write your questions down. And around a quarter till, y'all hold me accountable. We'll give you as much access as possible to be able to engage her directly. Just keep in mind, you would normally have to get on her calendar and even possibly try to give some type of consultation. She's an expert in the business. And so I yield now to I wanted to call you Reverend, but I'm gonna have to hold back on that just a little bit. I want to welcome to some and introduce to others Dr. Allison Caban-Holt.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for the invitation to join you today and to spend time with you and your audience talking about these very important issues around mental health. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Everyone, my presentation title is Seeking Mental Health in an Age of Misinformation. And the reason why I chose that topic is because right now we have so much access to information, but sometimes it's good, sometimes it is accurate, and sometimes it is not. And I wanted to talk about mental illness in that space. There are longstanding myths and misunderstandings regarding mental health that we have, live with for years and years. But I really want to open up the conversation today and talk about mental illness and how it relates to us in our everyday lives. In a time where social media and the internet can spread information at the speed of light, we need to also be aware that we can spread false information just as quickly, and the effects that that can have on people who are managing mental illness. So again, as Dr. Williams said, if you have questions, please write them down and I'll address them during our Q&A session. Please begin the presentation. Okay. Next slide. So for this talk, I'm going to be touching on these particular items, including telling you just a little bit about me, talking about what is mental illness prevalence, myths around mental illness, social media and the internet, a double-edged sword, pursuing mental wellness, stigma and mental illness, and how to combat mental health stigma. Next slide. Just to tell you a little bit about me, I am currently the Associate Director at the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity at Wake Forest School of Medicine in Winston-Salem. I hold a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and I was at the University of Kentucky prior to coming to the Maya Angelou Center for 18 years, where I worked at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center there. Much of my work involves Alzheimer's disease and caregiving research, but at the Maya Angelou Center, a major focus for us is in removing barriers from optimal health through health equity. So we say that health equity is giving people the opportunity to be as healthy as they possibly can be. And we think that that is important in terms of health access, healthcare access, as well as having discussions and talk about what may be holding us back that is not related to actual access to care. Next slide, please. So one question that we have to start with is, what is mental illness? So mental illness involves conditions having to do with emotion, your thinking, behavior, or some combination of those things. And mental illnesses are associated with distress or problems in functioning in your social life, your employment, and in your family activities. So mental illness includes both the symptoms of emotion, thinking, and behavior, but it's also when it becomes a problem is when it starts interfering with your functioning and how you get along. Next slide. So I wanted to just talk about a couple of common mental symptoms of mental illness. So one is depression. That comes up very frequently. We may be familiar with it, but I did want to make sure that you know some of the symptoms of depression. So depression, when you see it, it can look like sadness, but it can also include things like trouble sleeping, which would exacerbate some of these other symptoms as well. Appetite changes, that can be both eating too much or not eating enough. So that can cause both weight gain or weight loss. Withdrawal from social life. A person doesn't want to go out or be around people anymore. Low energy, which probably is exacerbated by trouble sleeping. But also irritability. So people who are depressed may not only show sadness, but they may show irritability as well, which may mask us recognizing that they're actually dealing with depression, not just sadness, that they're dealing with depression and that irritability is a sign of that. And then suicidal thoughts. Many of you may know that rates of suicide are increasing. We're seeing it in different populations. In the past, it would be less frequent that you'd see African Americans committing suicide, but that is happening. The rates in the African American community are increasing. And so we do need to be to have some awareness of and recognize that even when people on the surface have everything going, seem to have everything going for them, they could be struggling. I think of recently, Naomi Judd died by suicide very recently. And you would think, you have money, you have fame, you have talent, but that means nothing if you're in the depths of a depression. Next slide. I also wanted to talk about how to recognize symptoms of anxiety in yourself and others. So, another common mental illness is anxiety, feelings of nervousness, avoidance, overthinking, memory issues. And so, I just want people to be aware of the fact that we have depression and anxiety. And sometimes when you see some of these symptoms, you may not see all of them, but it may be beneficial to reach out to someone if you are experiencing a number of these to look at this more closely, but also that you may be recognizing this in others around you. Next slide. I wanted to talk about the prevalence of mental illness as well. The importance there is that I think we commonly think that mental illness is just particular people, a small group, but that is not so. The slide in front of you it provides some of the some statistics about the prevalence of mental illness. So we see that it is much more common than we would have thought. So 1 in 5 adults in the United States experiences mental illness. So that's 20% of us. 1 in 20 adults experience serious mental illness. So not only do we have commonly that 20% of us have mental illness, but that another relatively significant percent, 5%, have serious mental illness. And in terms of looking at our youth, 17% of them also have experienced mental health disorders. And in terms of looking at what kinds of disorders are the most prevalent, anxiety disorders that we just talked about in the previous slide are very prevalent at 19%, with depression at 8%. So there are anxiety and depression make up for a large percentage of mental illnesses that we experience in the United States. And in terms of looking at different populations, you can see that 21% of all adults experience mental illness, with the LGBTQ population and people who report being multi-race being at the highest levels of having a mental illness, prevalence of mental illness in a given year. Next slide. And why do we care about the prevalence of mental illness? Well, it does have a ripple effect. So the mental illness affects not only that person, but their family, their community, and the world. So people with mental illnesses are actually at increased risk for other chronic diseases like diabetes and cancer. 18% of adults in the US with mental illness also have a substance use disorder. So that means they may be indulging in drugs and alcohol, possibly for trying to stabilize mood or change their mood. So those things may be exacerbated and working together in a negative way in a person. And the rates of cardiometabolic disease are also more likely in people with a serious mental illness. So you might have someone who has a serious mental illness. Now they're needing to manage both a mental illness plus a very significant physical illness. Taking into account that could add more stress, and how does the management of that mental illness affect their ability to handle that physical illness? In terms of family, mental illness affects the family by the amount of caregiving that might have to be done by family members to help take care of the person who has the mental illness. It's estimated that 8.4 million Americans provide care, and caregivers often provide an average of 32 hours per week of unpaid care. So that's money that's not coming into the family. That's people out of the workforce. And when you take into account that 32 hours a week, that's almost a full-time job taking care of others. So that can have a tremendous effect on the family. In terms of the community, 21% of people experiencing homelessness also have serious mental illness. And we'll talk about that more later in my presentation. 37% of people who are incarcerated have a diagnosed mental illness. So being in an incarceration environment, and then also needing mental health management makes things much more complicated. 70% of youth in juvenile justice have a mental illness, and 1 in 8 visits to the emergency room are related to mental health issues and substance use disorders. And I really want to bring that back about the community. Is just the fact that now you have mental illness butting up against the justice system and the legal system, and how those things may be working together, and why law enforcement and legal environments may need more help managing mental illness, because they are not the mental illness. They may not be equipped to deal with mental illness. They're a legal system. And so we may need to provide more help to those systems to deal with the serious mental illness that they will encounter with the people who may be coming through their doors. And then in terms of the world prevalence, depression is a leading cause of disability, and we lose $1 trillion globally in productivity due to mental illness. Next slide. Now, myths and misconceptions about mental illness are very prevalent. They certainly can spread easily via internet and social media, and can lead to people avoiding getting the help that they may need. And acceptance of mental health and treatment for mental health may vary by culture, and I also put in their gender, because oftentimes men are less likely to seek out assistance regarding mental health, and that is not as accepted in many societies for them to admit to needing some assistance with mental health. Next slide. I wanted to talk about some of the myths around mental illness. Dr. Williams' program talks about myths, and I wanted to dispel some around mental illness and mental health. So one myth that's very common is that people should be able to handle mental health issues on their own. And what I really want to do, there's going to be a recurring theme throughout my presentation, which is that mental illnesses are medical conditions, and we should exert the same logic that you would regarding a medical illness to mental illness as well. And so going down that line, if you were to break your leg, no one would expect you to just walk off the pain. They'd say, go see a doctor, get your leg reset so that it'll heal right. But we don't use that same logic when we talk about mental health. Just as the same way that you would seek care for a physical illness, you should have the same expectation around receiving effective treatment for mental health issues as well. And it is your right to seek out treatment. Next slide. Another myth is that people with strong support networks don't need therapy. Therapists provide a different level of support from your friends and your family. So a professional mental health should be confidential. When you are going to seek help, you won't have someone who is going to share with others what you have shared with them. We are bound by HIPAA laws, and as well as other ethics to not share what we have learned in sessions with our patients. And you have control over the information and who it gets shared with. Years ago, when I was doing my training, I had someone came to my session, and They were very excited to share with me that one of their friends was also getting therapy with me, and I had to tell this person, I cannot confirm nor deny that I know that person or that they're in treatment here. We are bound to not share that information, even though this patient, this individual, and another client had talked with each other and they were fine sharing that information, but I could not confirm that. So we are bound to not share information outside of the session. A therapist should be objective and will not be judging you, does not know the people who might be part of what you're discussing. So we won't be taking sides because we don't know the individual. So you will get an objective perspective just from what you report. And then counselors and therapists have been trained for treating mental illness. So you will get someone who is skilled. Next slide. The next myth is that mental health disorders are a sign of weakness or a lack of willpower. And this is one that really holds people back from getting help. Again, applying the same logic as a medical condition, just like diabetes, heart disease, and other conditions, you deserve to get treatment so that you can take care of those conditions. We should think of mental health disorders the same way. And mental health disorders are caused by a number of factors, including genetics and environment, but also experiences like trauma. And managing such a disorder will require strength and resilience and the ability to overcome any stigma or fear that the person has in talking about what they're going through. And this myth is gradually disappearing as we understand mental health, mental illness better. And we're going to be talking about combating mental illness stigma later in this presentation. Next slide. The next myth is that people with mental illness are dangerous, and research shows that people with mental health disorders are not violent or are no more violent than anyone else, and are actually more likely to be a victim of violence or than be a perpetrator of it. And 21% of homeless have serious mental illness. We said that before, and it may be your experience, perhaps, that you've seen people homeless out on the street that may be experiencing some of those symptoms and calling out. But if you imagine that an individual who's dealing with a serious mental illness and is homeless may not have the stability of their medication, may not have the stability of their environment, and so I can imagine that being in a homeless situation is definitely not an optimal environment for people to get mental health care. So, or to maintain good mental health. So we do want to, we need to have some awareness of how being homeless may exacerbate the ability of the individual to get consistent mental health care if they have a serious mental illness. Next slide. And this relatedly, most people, the myth is that most people with mental illness live on the streets and are in mental hospitals. But over 2/3 of Americans who have mental illness are in the community and lead productive lives. So these are your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones who are dealing with mental illness. And most people who have mental illness may be hospitalized for short periods of time, just like you would in any other medical condition. You might need to go to the hospital for a while, get better, and come back home. The same with mental illness as well. Next slide. And our last myth that I wanted to talk about is that the myth that mental health therapies don't work. And actually, research has disproved this myth thoroughly. There are a number of evidence-based therapies that can be used and have been shown to be effective in treating depression and anxiety, but there is no cookie cutter treatment. There's no one treatment that works for everyone and for every condition. So that's why an individual's treatment needs to be personalized and customized specific to them. Next slide. And I just wanted to segue quickly to getting the most out of therapy. Next slide. That in order for therapy to work, we have to make sure the person that is seeking treatment and their therapist are actually compatible. You may have experienced this the same with going to see a doctor, and you go see a new doctor. It's like, I don't know if I like this doctor or if we get along well. It's the same in therapy. If anything, it may be even more important that the person seeking help and the therapist are compatible, because you will be sharing with them personal information and working together very closely. So it's very important that the therapist and the person seeking help are compatible. And if you find that you're not, you don't have to stay with that therapist. Go and seek someone who you feel like you could have a better working relationship with. Seeking treatment, that the person seeking treatment is committed. So it's not going to be that you would be in therapy and the therapist is just going to be talking at you. You need to be engaged with that individual. And so you definitely need to be engaged in that process in order to see benefit. Make sure that the therapist practice evidence-based therapies, like we said in the prior slide, and practice what the therapist and you decide upon in terms of your approach every day. You have to put into practice these therapies or they won't work the same way any other therapy would work. Physical therapy, you go home and you do those exercises that the physical therapist recommends. It's the same with mental health therapy as well. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, and I guess one of my slides was out of order. So this is the last myth, actually, and that is that psychiatric medications are bad. So sometimes people taking medications is considered to be a cop-out, or, hey, this is the easy way out. But just like any other condition that you would have, you would take medication to help resolve it. And sometimes the medication may be temporary and sometimes it may be lifelong. But just like in the case of a physical condition, we would also say that a person may need medication to resolve a mental illness as well. Next slide. The signs that a person may need some mental health support is that if they're experiencing prolonged stress, anxiety, or depression, so meaning that it's not going away, persistent irritability, anger, or sadness, there may be something that can be treated. A decline in work performance, if you want to look at something that's more objective, withdrawing from relationships or having consistent relationship problems, decreased motivation or concentration, especially when people are anxious or depressed. Concentration can be very difficult, leading to difficulty doing other activities, and use of alcohol or drugs has increased or has changed. Next slide. Just in terms of talking about pursuing mental health, there are mental health conditions can be treatable. Improvement is possible, and many people with mental health conditions can return to full functioning. Next slide. We first want to get a diagnosis. So when is a mood or thinking problem, thinking issue serious enough to consider to be a mental health concern? Now, sometimes depressed mood is normal. So someone loses a loved one or you lose a job, that depression would be a very normal reaction to that. Sometimes anxiety can be a normal reaction to a stressor. You have something happen to you, and then you may be anxious for some time. But if the depressed or anxious mood continues and does not decrease or decline, or starts to get in the way of functioning, someone may need to get some professional care if it's interfering, say, with work or family activities. And sometimes family or friends might recognize a change that the person themselves may not recognize. Next slide. Mental illness and medical conditions. There are some mental illnesses that are related to medical conditions, such as thyroid disease, can sometimes cause people to be depressed or anxious. Some mental illness can look like a medical condition. So, for example, if someone is dealing with a significant depression, that may cause them to have trouble remembering or having or their concentration may be reduced, which may make them look like they're having a memory disorder when really it is depression. And mental health diagnosis usually involves a full evaluation. So we don't just make sure that the person is physically okay, and that there's not something physical going on that might be related to the mental illness. And so a workup could include blood work or a neurologic exam or other exams, and make sure that the symptoms are not related to another medical issue. Next slide. Now, to talk about treatment, the diagnosis of a mental disorder is not the same as the need for treatment. So, for example, if you went to the doctor and the doctor said you had hypertension, that is your diagnosis. But the treatment for that would be either taking medication, or your doctor would give you would provide you with some treatment regimen. It's the same with this. Just because you have a diagnosis, that is not the same as needing to get treatment or what your treatment plan is. You would work with your mental health professional to determine what a treatment plan is. And again, it's not cookie cutter. So your need for treatment may take into consideration how severe are your symptoms, how much distress are the symptoms causing, risk and benefits of treatment, whether the mental illness issues are complicating other illnesses. So you may not be able to take the same medications that you would if you were not perhaps dealing with another medical illness. So a number of treatment recommendations may follow, not just medication, not just therapy, but maybe a combination of things. Next slide. So you're likely to, if someone pursues a mental health diagnosis, they likely would be given a treatment team. And this team includes the person themselves, a mental health clinician, but family members may be part of the treatment team, a primary care physician. They may include psychotherapy, which is talk therapy. There may be medication or some combination of these things. Some complementary and alternative therapies are also being used increasingly. So it may suggest massage or acupuncture or other kinds of exercise. Next slide. And I wanted to put out there also that there's self-help as well that might be a part of your treatment plan. So this may include lifestyle changes. So making sure that you're getting optimal nutrition. Again, we talked about very early that with anxiety, someone may with depression, someone may have changes in their appetite. So making sure the person is getting adequate nutrition, adequate sleep, exercise, and there may be a number of lifestyle changes that are recommended as part of a person's treatment. Next slide. I also wanted to talk about social media and the internet and as a double-edged sword. So we have information at our fingertips, and we can access information about health concerns privately, which is good, that people can do searches on things that they're concerned about and seek information. However, there is misinformation and disinformation on the internet. Misinformation is when information is put on is put out there that is not intended to be misleading. It is just but it's inaccurate. And disinformation is purposefully providing information that is known to be inaccurate. So there's both. And so misinformation can be that someone genuinely believes they are telling, are providing an accurate account, and maybe they're not. Next slide. Misinformation is also related to depression. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, many conditions became ripe for the spread of misinformation. So there's social isolation and financial and employment changes, and people are spending more time indoors and on social media in order to connect and make up for not being able to be in person. And depression has been shown to cause people to be more receptive to misinformation. And more vulnerable to cyberbullying. So individuals with depression may be primed to endorse negative content that they see on the internet. So a person may already be feeling sad or depressed, and maybe they're seeking out information that seems to match their mood. So we need to just be aware that misinformation may worsen depression. Next slide. I wanted to talk just for a minute about mental health stigma. So, having mental illness and seeking help for mental illness is a bit of a catch-22. So we say that there tend to be stigma around having a mental illness, but we even stigmatize people wanting to get help for mental illness. And we want to and so we have to break that cycle. The stigma is common, but as we can see, mental illness is also common, and people need to have the opportunity to get help for their mental illness the way that they would a physical illness. Next slide. And mental health stigma looks a little bit like these are some things that you may hear, which is all women are a bit bipolar. Bipolar is a diagnosis, and we don't say that people are bipolar because of a behavior. Mental illness is an excuse to live off of benefits. Therapy and medications are just scams. These are some ways that we see mental health stigma that you may hear commonly, and we have to combat this. Next slide. And the consequences of the mental health stigma include self-doubt, fewer opportunities for people to get jobs, insurance doesn't cover treatment, a reluctance to seek treatment, a reluctance to seek help, bullying, and a lack of understanding from loved ones. Next slide. So we really need to stop the stigma. Next slide. So there are things that we can do to reduce mental health stigma. Next slide. Yeah, there you go. So for example, discuss mental health without shame. Document mental health transformation. So if you have received help for mental health, a mental illness, and you get better, sharing that, documenting that, saying, yes, these things have worked for me. Fostering a culture, number 11, I think is extremely important. Fostering a culture that allows men to feel comfortable asking for help. That is something that we, at least in American society, we do not do well. Men often suffer in silence, and they may end up acting out in a dysfunctional way, whether that's violence or drinking or some other or substance use. So we really need to open up the door for people to get the help that they need. Speak up. If you notice signs of mental illness, if you see someone who's looking like they may be dealing with a depression, see if you can open up that door in an accepting way to talk about it, and recognizing that it's going to take all of us to spread mental health awareness. Next slide. These were the references that were used in my presentation. Next slide. And here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me in any way that I can provide information or connect you with other resources. I'd be happy to. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Dr. Caban-Holt, my goodness. I would not want to be the clinician to come after you. You have raised the bar exceptionally high with some very practical information. I want our viewers to begin to send in your questions. I have some that we wanted to start out with that have already come in. I want to maximize our time because there are so many questions that are already on tap. Thank you all. Continue to send those in. Our first question was already from Sister Ethel in the chat. She asked, does nutrition and vitamins affect mental health?
Thank you, Ethel, for that great question. So yes, actually it does. So we believe that there are certain some vitamin deficiencies that could then cause symptoms that look like that mimic a mental illness. So, for example, a lot of B vitamins, if people have a B vitamin deficiency, sometimes that can cause some symptoms that might be seen as being depressed and or usually depression. So so definitely making sure that optimal nutrition and optimal making sure that there's enough vitamin and appropriate nutrition is important in supporting positive mental health.
Thank you for that. And then there are a couple of questions that are already in the queue. Question number 4 is why is depression more prevalent in women than in men?
Yeah, I really think that that's I think it's for one main reason I think is about diagnosing and seeking help. We, toward the end of my presentation, sometimes we do not, um, it is a little bit less, it's been in society a little bit less acceptable for men to get help for depression or for mentally related issues. And so I think some of it has to do with even diagnosing and awareness of it. And again, if we think of perhaps someone it may be depression, it might be the root, but maybe the way that they the way that they express it might be irritability or anger, and so it's not appropriately categorized. So there may be the possibility that it's maybe as prevalent in men, but maybe is misdiagnosed as other conditions. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Women also, there's certainly a number of stressors that might be related as well in terms of women's additional stresses. For example, family care. Women still take up the brunt of care for family and children and things like that. So there may be other reasons that are stress related, but I think some of it has to do with underdiagnosis of men.
That is absolutely profound, and I do agree with that as well. As we all know, men, the research suggests that our health is 7 times worse than that of others. Counter groups as well. And so you're exactly right. And a lot of that's because we don't get the diagnosis. So thank you for bringing awareness to that. Brothers, let's get on to the action item. Let's go get that follow-up checkup to make that box go away. Listen, I want to give a shout out to Pastor Jonathan Stowe, a new pastor on his assignment. He has a question. Thank you, Pastor. Very profound question. How do we as a community attempt to break down the barriers to communicating effectively and advocating for mental health? Solid question, Pastor.
Thank you, Reverend Stowe. This is a fantastic question. I think it, and I love the fact that we're here talking about this together in this environment. Some of it has to do about even just having a conversation and saying, a mental illness or a mental issue is something you should get treated. We should be able to talk about it. It shouldn't be, if somebody has hypertension, they'll come out and just say, hey, I have hypertension. But if we have a depression, we may not talk about that. I think some of it is talking about it. Some of it is making it acceptable that when someone says, hey, I have a mental illness, we don't recoil and that we actually encourage them to go get help, and not you can handle it on your own. Don't worry about getting any help for that. Um, and I think especially with people having who have stature in the community, like our faith leaders, I think it is profound when a faith leader says, "I think, I would like to address mental health." I think that's incredibly important. So reducing the stigma by let's talk about it. Let's put it out in the open. That's the only way we're going to deal with it.
Thank you, Dr. Caban-Holt. And again, thank you, Pastor Stowe. It is exactly, we are the watchmen on the wall. And so therefore, when we see these stigmas, we are duty bound to really speak up and speak out, to raise awareness and also to get advocacy, which leads us to our next question. Dr. Caban-Holt, can you tell us what type of support groups should we seek out?
Um, so um, so there are a number of different kinds of ways a person can get treated, or can begin to have some treatment for a mental illness. So one type is by looking at support groups. And so um, if someone wants to pursue participating in a support group, you want to have some diagnosis and know what kind of support group you need. So, for example, if you're dealing with a substance use disorder or alcohol, you may go to an Al-Anon or Alkanon meeting, and that might be a good support group for you. If you're dealing with a different kind of uh, condition like depression or anxiety, you might seek out a different kind of support group. There are support groups for people who have more serious psychiatric issues. So you need to seek out a support group that is akin to the kind of mental health condition that you are managing.
Very nice. And so, and then as a faith leader, I would even advocate, if there are no support groups in your area, be the change agent and try to start one as well. And so we can do that through mechanisms like our family. I know some families that have family meetings where they begin to talk about things in the family. Or I know some use the church as a mechanism. Talk to your local faith leader to be able to say, can our church be the support group hub for our area? These are wonderful ways that we can get involved. Also, wanted to ask, there's another question. What is PPD, postpartum depression? Dr. Caban-Holt, can you speak just a little bit to that?
Sure. So this occurs after a woman has had a baby, and it is a very significant level of depression that often interferes with their ability to to bond with the baby after having given birth. It's one of the reasons why I know that when you go in for your well baby visits afterwards, the doctor will often ask you, "Are you feeling low? Are you feeling depressed?" Because they are looking to identify postpartum depression and receive and help you get help for that, so that doesn't interfere with your ability to bond with your child. That's what postpartum depression is. It's usually temporary,
Oh,
but it
right.
can be very significant.
Very good. And I'm trying to get these in. They're coming at me left and right like a tidal wave. Numbers. The next question is, can you talk about what about depression later in life? Is that a relevancy?
Oh, thank you for that question. Whoever shared that, and it's something that I didn't go into deeply into my presentation, but it is very significant. Depression. A lot of times, people develop depression after they retire,
Wow.
um, in older age, especially as maybe physical health issues start to increase. Sometimes people become depressed. It is very important that we identify and are aware of the issues of suicide in older adults, because that is another time of life where suicide rates increase because of some of these other changes and potential disability later in life. So yes, unfortunately, our elders are suffering with depression.
Nice. And so you've heard it here, right here on our broadcast. Be on the lookout for those signs and symptoms. If you are a caregiver, if you are someone who is a medical power of attorney for your seniors, be on the lookout for those symptoms, even in later life. Thank you for that, Dr. Caban-Holt. The next question is, what is the most promising recent developments to treat depression? Do you have any ideas on some cutting edge things that are out there for us now to be on the lookout for?
So you probably see everywhere now on on TV and in commercials tons of new medications for depression. There are a number of medications that are coming forth for treating depression and anxiety. I think what I would like to say is really that it is all about getting that good diagnosis, because one medication may work for you, something else might not. And being persistent with getting medical treatment or medication treatment. Many medications take 6 weeks to really get to an optimal level in the person, and during that 6 weeks, you have to kind of hold on there until you can get to the treatment, get the treatment at an optimal level. There are a number of different medications that are coming forth, but getting a diagnosis that is accurate is the most important thing.
Dr. Caban-Holt, I know I'm going to get a bop on the head. I've got so many more questions that are coming. I'm going to run out of time. I see it coming on already. Listen, I just need to ask one last question, and you can give me a 30-second because they need to hear how to get back in contact with you. The last question is question 13. Can brain scans guide treatment for depression?
Oh, that's a really good one. We are looking at brain scans. So there's something called a functional MRI, where we have people in a scanner and look at the flow of activity in the brain while people are in the scanner, and so they are looking at different ways to. We are looking at how changes in the brain and changes in blood flow or activity in the brain change in depression as well as other conditions.
Dr. Caban-Holt, listen, I know I'm on 1,000 because this broadcast today has been phenomenally high level, and I want to thank you for the content, which has been nothing short of pristine. I want to give you one last moment to speak to the audience. There are so many questions. Group, I'm asking you to get your pens and paper out. She's going to put her information on the screen, and you will be able to, there's no way I could get all these questions on the screen. And so you feel free to reach out to her. This is exactly what our broadcast is designed to do, so that you can engage with the best in the business around concerns that have helped our community. So Dr. Caban-Holt, I'll give you a last 30 seconds and then we'll give our benediction.
Thank you, everyone, for joining and staying tuned. Please reach out to me if there's any information that I can share with you. And let's advocate for reducing mental health stigma. Thank you.
This has been absolutely phenomenal. A quick shout out, Sister Janie from the DC area, Pastor Stowe. Thank you, Pastor Carter. Thank you as well. I want to shout out to Reverend William Smith from my Diggs Memorial as well. Listen, Sister Mother Hazel Boyd, Dr. Ruth Kennedy, thank you all for your excellence today. My time is up. I want to thank you again for yours. May God bless you. Would you allow me to pray with you as we exit today? Father, we thank you for time well spent today in this space. We ask, Father, that the words of our mouth and the meditation of our heart will be accepted in our sight. Bless Dr. Caban-Holt for the ministry impartation on today. Each of us, we leave this space more inspired and informed. It is in Jesus' name. May God bless you. May heaven smile upon you. And may God's richest blessings be yours on this day. In Jesus' name, amen.